Hello and welcome to Theater Operations Unleashed, the monthly show that explores the ins and outs of theater operations, management, facilities, and design. I'm your host, Raymond Kent. In each episode, we will be focusing on management, operations, design, trends, and best practices in the performing arts. I hope to bring you both insights from my 4 decades in the industry, as well as engaging conversations with theater professionals about the challenges and rewards of their work. We'll also cover a wide range of topics from budgeting and scheduling to marketing and audience development, theater technology, and many other related topics. Whether you're a theater maker yourself or just interested in the industry, I hope you'll find this podcast informative and inspiring. So sit back, relax, or lean in, and let's dive into the world of theater. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Theater Operations Unleashed. I am here with my lovely friend, Elizabeth Greer, again. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello.
Glad to always jump on these kind of calls here with you. Today, we thought we'd talk a little bit about the why, right?
That's
Um,
right. And I'm
it's a
so pleased to be back, Ray. Thank you. Yes, the why.
it's a great thing to consider for anybody going into this business.
Hmm.
You and I were just talking a few minutes ago about just the little bit of chaos that we have going on in the world,
Right.
particularly here in America. So really, I think solidifying your why can help
Hmm.
ground you, right?
That's right.
In terms of where you want to be, what you want to do, how you want to approach things. You and I have talked about a number of things over the years. Last time we had a great conversation about, how to get into school and some of the things that, you provide as a service to help
Hmm.
people prepare for that.
For
But it
BFA
really,
and MFA auditions, right?
absolutely. But I think really the why, as we talked about after that call, is so important. So why don't we just sort of jump right in? One of
Hmm.
the things I'd really love to hear from you is that moment that you could pinpoint, or that experience that you had that said, this is why I want to pursue this art form, right?
Right.
What was it about that moment that resonated with you? Was it the big proverbial aha moment, or did you kind of sneak into it?
I love all of those ideas. They're all romantic and heroic ideas of being bitten by the bug. That's what we call it, bitten by the bug.
Yep, 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 indeed.
Yes, I knew at 6 years old, it was one of those, oh, mom and dad, I want to be those people up there kind of thing.
Hmm.
The why for me, the why for me has not changed much. For me, it's being on vacation. For me to be playing, dealing with someone else's life instead of mine per se, to of course find myself in there, but to deal with someone else's life, that seems like being on vacation to me. Go be Sue for the next 3 days instead of Elizabeth or Sally or whatever
Yeah.
it is.
Was there one particular moment that you felt that way, that really kind of sparked that interest, or was this something that
Oh
grabbed
yeah, I just thought acting was a party. I used to my two pivotal things were I used to watch Carol Burnett and
you? Hmm.
just see her on the Carol Burnett show create all these different characters. And I used to think, oh, that's like what being on vacation feels like. You get to do this and this and this.
Yeah.
And also the film The Red Shoes for some reason.
Ooh, that good movie. Yeah, that's it. That's an interesting choice. What was it about that film that
to
let
just
you
to,
go,
to,
ah,
to, to just dance until you drop. And in other
right?
words, or perform or make art until you drop.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's so great. Yeah, because I think sometimes it happens at a very young age, right?
mhm.
And other times people later in life, like myself in particular, I was always around theater. I came out of theater. I was a theater kid, right?
Mhm.
But it wasn't. I never saw it as a career, right?
Right.
It was fun. Um, I liked it. I liked the people. I liked being on stage. I liked being backstage, this and the other. I wanted to be a doctor.
Right.
I always wanted to be a doctor. And you and I had this conversation where, you know, um, I wanted to help people. I wanted to make people feel better. I'd always been around doctors and everything. And so,
Yeah.
um, signing up for the army to go be an army surgeon. That was my
Mm-hmm.
career path, and they were going to go
Mm-hmm.
to ROTC. But I
Mm.
still stayed connected to theater because it was my tribe, right?
Right.
They were people that I liked, people I liked hanging out with a lot more than I think people that were in, pre-med with me.
Right.
And so, when I had a health issue and the army said, you can't be in the army with this health issue. So
Mm-hmm.
they released me from service before, I received my commission, and I had
Mm.
to do something,
Right.
right? And I remember sitting at college at Ohio University and sitting on
Mm.
the steps of, the main gate into the main original quad, because Ohio U is the first university in the state of Ohio, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's this very historic quad, and right across the street was the theater where I
Right.
had work study and everything else, and I saw friends and everything. And for me, that was my sort of big aha moment.
Mm.
Like, I like that place.
Right.
I like spending my time there. I like the people.
Right.
And I think that being in that type of environment, and I think that's the same for any job that you go into, hopefully people get jobs. I say this to my son all the time. I'm sure you say this to your daughter.
Yeah.
You hopefully you find a career that is to your vernacular there, like a vacation. Like you
Right.
don't feel like you're working, like you feel like you fit in, like you're
Right.
part of that world, right? And that you have that sort of aha moment, and that was
Mm.
it for me, right? It was just sitting there thinking about what am I going to do now, and
Mm.
just staring off into space and staring at the theater and seeing my theater friends going in and out and coming by and waving at me, and it's like that's where I need to be,
I
and turned it
love
into a
that. You
career.
just felt your people, us theater rats, we radiate
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
we radiate
absolutely.
theater ratness even across a quad.
Yeah. Has and now you say that your why hasn't really changed much, right? Um, but clearly, me, anybody goes into this and has a career in it, they change over time, right?
Of
You
course.
grow as an artist. That's why we go to graduate school. That's why we go to undergrad. That's why we go out for a million auditions, or we, design all these shows and everything we do, we grow, right?
Right.
Um, have there been certain motivations in that way that become more or less prominent for you in your growth?
Yeah, it's so interesting. You remember, on the first day of Yale Drama School where we both went to school, our master teacher, of course, the great Earl Gister,
Hmm.
said that acting should be as simple as when you're little kids running around the kitchen and you tap your sibling and say, "You be the bad guy, I be the good guy," or the reverse.
Sure.
And that it should just that you simply just are, and that's it, and you don't have to explain it to anyone, and there are no agents and managers, and there's no agenda, and there's nothing. You just be that person, and you're that person, poof, right?
Yeah.
And and it's that playful, and it's that much expression with total abandon. And I think I so try to have that be the why and to get back there, because I think the why can get muddied so easily that it's suddenly for my agents to like me, or this casting director to call me in again, or whatever. The why, I guess, really has to be from this joyous place of you're doing it because you're having the best time doing it. I've noticed that the performers who are having the best time um, are often the ones we like to watch the most. And then, of course, the whole different issue could be that you like to be in entertainment because you're trying to evoke social change, right?
Sure. Yeah. That's an important one, especially now, right?
Yeah, tell me how what you see as far as that being people's whys out there.
Well, certainly art, as we know, and I teach theater history as
Right.
one of the classes, right? So we look at that, and if you look at great times of strife,
Mm-hmm.
world wars and things like that, great art usually comes out of it. And in some ways, it's for people to go escape, right? There's
Mm.
a lot of escapism. So people create art as a means to pull people out of their misery and their suffering.
Right.
And then there are others, like we saw with George Floyd, great new art that was coming out of that pain
Right.
and that community as a way to draw people in and help educate them
Yes.
and help tell that story in a way that maybe hasn't been told before. And I think
Mm,
that that can be very powerful and very much a why for some people
yeah.
as to why they get into it. When I was doing stand-up comedy, for example,
I
many
love
eons
that.
ago, um, I did it because I wanted to make people think,
Right.
not because I just wanted to get up there and hear people laugh. Kind of,
Right.
my
That's
idols were like
brilliant.
George Carlin, right?
Yeah.
And people that got up there and they were funny as all get out, but they made you think.
Yeah.
And I see that happening quite a lot. And even on the design side, people are doing designs that evoke emotions and get people to think beyond the everyday and or kind of get lost and or pull them out of where they were. Right. I just saw
Right.
uh, a great production of King James by one of
Mm.
our fellow classmates, Rachel Fink at Cleveland
Hmm.
Playhouse.
Mm.
Um, was a fantastic uh, show because it was able, you're able to kind of get lost in that story. And of course,
Right.
being Cleveland, I'm in Cleveland, right? So it's about the Cleveland Cavaliers and King James and all that other stuff, right?
Right.
Um, so there's a connection to it, but you could sit there and watch the audience watching that, and they felt connected
Hmm.
and like that fourth wall melting away. And as you and I have talked about before, what makes world-class theater? It's somebody to tell the story, somebody to listen, and telling a great story, right?
Hmm.
And what is that story? It could be entertainment, it could be to teach, it could be to provide a level of escape or things like that. And I think that provides a good why moment for why so many people get into this line of work, right? Just like I
Right.
wanted to be a doctor because my why for that was I wanted to help people, right?
Right.
What I've done is I found a way to help people through my craft and through my art.
That's exactly right. It's and in ways that might even be more profound.
Yeah, yeah. So beyond that immediate joy of creating, which I know you do so well, right, on stage and on screen,
Yeah.
are there some deeper personal motivations that really kind of continue you to drive your practice and continue to grow as an artist? And
Yeah, I think I try to really be there for other artists as much as humanly possible. Because I think it's so important that, especially in this administration and everything going on, that we don't lose track of how unbelievably important the arts are. So I really try and see all my friends' shows and videos and clips and help each other with self tapes and this and that. Because that's one why. It's a way to, you know, be accountable as a friend, and a supporter at in times when, it I don't think that's the first priority for a lot of people. Um, it's
right.
so important to support our fellow artists, right?
Absolutely. And and if you think about, managing and running a theater, right? Or being in operations and leadership within a theater and
Hmm.
having that community that you have to support,
Right.
not just the staff, but the artists that come in and out and the patrons and the volunteers and all of that. And so, that's why, you know, um, I think so many people are drawn to it. It gives you that opportunity to intersect with so many different kinds of personalities, but people who are passionate about it
Right.
in a way that is, I think, different than, say, a corporate job, right? Not that
That's
people
right.
aren't necessarily passionate about a corporate job, but some of them are just in there to get a paycheck, or
Oh,
make
that's
a lot of money.
right. Did
Um,
you ever have a moment, Ray, where your why was threatened in any way?
yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question there. I think that, you know, there are certainly people that don't understand the arts
Right.
and particularly sometimes parents,
Oh,
right?
hell,
Or a
heck yes.
family. Why would you
Heck
ever
yes.
want to go into that job, that career?
Right.
You know, um, they don't see arts as a vehicle for um, a career path.
Anything.
Yeah, anything. I think it's
Right.
well, it's I have this conversation with my students quite often. Um, so many of them, as you know, they just say, "Oh, I'm going to go be an actor, and then I'm going to graduate with my degree and run right off to Broadway and be a superstar, or go
Right.
to Hollywood and be a blockbuster." It's like slow down.
Yep.
That's a great aspiration, but there's a path to get there, right?
Right.
Um, and not that you want to put roadblocks in their way, but I feel as an educator, I have to find a way to guide them to that path or anything else, right? But I
That's right.
certainly in my life have had people tell me, a couple in the arts themselves, that, oh, you're never going to be successful. You're
Right.
never going to be, able to find a job in this business. Well, here I am almost 4 decades later, you know,
Right.
with a fairly significant career,
Right.
um, working around the world, designing all kinds of shows and theater buildings and things like that. And I think in some ways, even though it was negative on my why and caused me in some instances to question my why, what I
Mhm.
also found is that it really motivated me even more to push through my why and
Right.
say, that's my grounding rod right there is I know who I am, I know what I want to do and what I want to be, and I want to shut the critics out, unless they've lived in my shoes,
Yeah.
and are in our world and have lived the pain and the hardship and the successes and everything else, because it's good and bad, then they can be critics all they want, but I gotta shut them out of my head
Right.
in order to, say, okay, well, I'm not going to give you space here, but I
Right.
am going to give you the opportunity to come be part of it, but I'm not going to take your critique that's going to destroy my why, right? And I think
That's right.
um, that's a lesson that I think too many people often don't learn, or they learn too late, right? They
Right.
let the critics, it's like reading the comments on a post,
Yeah.
or
Right.
the reviews of some bad critic somewhere, right?
Right.
That I remember uh, when we had Coolsville Comedy Cabaret in Laguna Beach, and would have these young comics come and audition for our show and everything, and if they got a bad review, the world was going to end, and oh, I just got to give
Right.
up on being a comedian. It's like, I don't let one bad review
That's right.
discourage you, right?
That's right.
Um, can you share a specific example of how your why has directly influenced a particular
Sure.
piece of your work or creative decision you made? I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's kind of tangential to that, right?
it really is. I think for myself, and I think for so many actors I know, your why gets threatened every time, every day that you don't have an audition.
Sure.
Every time you don't hear that you booked it, your why is crushed just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's, you know, um so recommended that actors, take a good care of their mind, their body, their soul, and um not participate in anything that is bad for you in it, really in any way, because this is a job unlike any other, and you have to have the stamina of a racehorse,
Oh,
um,
sure. Yeah.
to
And
withstand all of this. Yeah.
yeah, and absolutely, that rejection and that resilience, it's so funny you bring up resilience. My son in his psychology class this semester, they're talking about resilience right now. And,
Mm,
he had to interview somebody he knew. So of course he chooses me, right?
right.
Um, as somebody that he sees as a resilient person. And he wanted to know how I got that way. I said, I work in the arts. You have to be resilient, right?
Exactly.
Stand-up comic, you got to have thick skin. You got to, as an actor, you got to be able to take rejection. As even a designer, you got to be able to have somebody say, "Yeah, your designs aren't my cup of tea, right?
That's
So I'm
right.
going to go somewhere else." And you got to say, "Okay, that's just what you have to do." Um, but there certainly are challenging times in the creative process, right? How do you find resilience in what you do?
Mm. We're so lucky that, I mean, one of, let's say, the good things about, as opposed to all of the challenging things about the internet, is that you can pull up any performance anywhere, anytime. And when I'm really feeling blue, I try and pull up any performance from my memory. I particularly like films that were made in the 60s and 70s, um, where I
Yeah.
might, or I might see something, theater on one of those fabulous platforms like how the Geffen or these different places have streaming, seasons, anything to get reinvigorated and re-inspired. And I'll think, hey, I'm really down right now, but if the bar, so to speak, is there and I want to raise myself to that bar, I better kind of dust myself off again, as soon as possible, right? And get back in there. And I'll think, oh, I'll do it for that person. For example, let's take one of our favorite alum, Meryl Streep. Maybe I'll see a performance of hers and think, I'm gonna snap myself out of this for Meryl or for whoever it is that I'm
Yeah.
watching, just so that I can get in the game again.
Yeah, that I mean that's a great point, right? Like I think about why I do what I do, right? And I
Hmm.
love the connection with the clients and I love the creativity and everything else. And again, going back to what my son had to put together for his class, he wrote about how I love to cook, right? So
Yeah,
I will, and that cooking is such a creative thing,
it so
um,
is.
right? And particularly being half Italian, half Slovak, it's all about the food,
Right.
right? Um, so, but being able to make food that I get to watch people enjoy, or being able to build my crazy Halloween displays
Right.
where, you know, a couple thousand kids show up at Halloween and enjoy it, and they're going to go back and they're going to remember when they were little kids that
Mm,
they went to this crazy street in this crazy town that
mm.
had all these really amazing Halloween things going on, or working on cars and taking a rust bucket of a car and stripping it down and
Yeah.
rebuilding and then looking at it going, yeah, I did that, or working on a
Yeah.
show, or and building this amazing set that um, works with the play and everybody, the whole thing is cohesive, right? It's the scenery, the
Right.
lighting, the sound, the costumes, the acting. Everything is so cohesive, and you just have those shows. One in particular I'll tell you about is Spitfire Grill.
Mm.
I designed the first show uh, off Broadway, right? When
Oh,
it first
how
came off
cool.
Broadway. So I designed the set for it. And it was just such an amazing show. Lighting designer was Polly Jenkins. She was amazing. Nick DeGruccio was the director. The cast was phenomenal. The audience was packed houses every night.
Mm.
It went from our theater, went on tour after that. And just everything came together. Richard Odell was the costume designer, another Yale alum.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just one of those things where everything just falls into place. That
Right.
really just kind of reinforces that why you're here and why you're doing it. And sometimes you have to find that why within the things. There are projects certainly that have gone six ways to Sunday, and
Yeah.
you have to when all hope is lost and all despair is lost, you have to try to stop and step back and say, this is why I'm doing this. What
That's
is
right.
the motivation, and how can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? Right?
That's
Um,
right.
do you have you ever lost touch with your initial why, or had a situation where you need to reconnect in that way?
Yeah, I think, all of us actors, um, we can get lost for a minute. We see someone we might know on a billboard. We, see people posting that they're working on this or that on Instagram, and we suddenly feel like a puppy with our nose up against the window, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And I think it's about, taking that moment to feel those feelings and then push them out and then really, really go to the bottom of your soul and know that that bodes well, that people are working and that your turn will come soon. And you gotta kind of get back and then you go right back to the why.
uh-huh,
And for me, I think acting is a huge privilege and a huge luxury. If you get to do it and you're paid for it, it's just a ridiculous luxury.
yeah.
So,
And what about these folks that you mentor and getting into school? How do you work
yeah.
with them to find their why?
Oh, that's so well put. I think a lot of these young actors know around the age I did. if they're bitten by the bug around that age, anywhere between, maybe 6 and 13 type of thing. I always feel
Hmm.
like there's a good chance that someone will know around that time. Um, I think that's really important though, because I've definitely had some kids that didn't realize that they were doing it just because of the fame aspect. And when they
Yeah.
saw, right, that wasn't necessarily going to come immediately, some of them decided, then if it's not, then it's not worth it to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. Certainly have students of mine that think they're going to be the next Scorsese,
yep,
or the next, P. Diddy, and going to put out the next album because they're recording, students and things like that. And
right,
I talk to my son about, he's a game design major, right? And so
right,
he doesn't necessarily think he's going to go work for like an EA Sports or a Blizzard or somebody like that. And I
yeah,
said, AAA games are great, but um, he wants to make a difference in the work that he does, right? He wants
mm.
to create games. I think the psychology class, which is psychology of aging,
Oh, I
which
love that.
he took because he needed another science credit, so he picked this one, thinking
Hmm.
his grandfather is up there in years, and just to try to understand a little bit more about some of the things that his
Mm.
grandfather's going through as he's getting older and everything. But it
Oh,
turned
I
out
love this.
it turned out to be a class that was about all of aging from the time you're a teenager all the way until you're 80, 90 years old. And
Yeah.
so it's been an amazing journey to watch him go through that class and pair it with game design. So he's working on a final paper about
Yeah.
how video games can help the elderly retain memory.
Oh, I love this.
Because as we are all getting older and living longer and medicine is better and everything, there's more opportunity for people to get dementia and Alzheimer's because we live longer, right? We just live
Right.
longer. And so, if gamification, creating of video games or getting elderly
Gamification.
to
I
play video
love
games,
this.
right? It, so I think he's kind of found something here, which I don't think he expected,
Yeah.
right? And his, if kind of like me, his why was he wanted to be a police officer, and then he kind of learned more about that and said, "Nope, not for me."
Yep.
But he loves video games, and I'm glad he found that out before he went through all the schooling and got on the force and all that other stuff, right? Not
Sure.
everybody's that lucky,
Right.
but it's been exciting watching him as he's getting ready in the next couple weeks to graduate, uh,
Oh,
to have
lovely.
this sort of epiphany,
Yeah.
right? And you've been lucky to have it early. I had it a little later, right?
Yeah.
Maybe around the same time he is now having that sort of epiphany, because I was in college. But
Sure.
it's the various whys, right, that might drive artists, or to do what we do, right? Do you see any common threads or maybe universal motivations that might connect creatives across the different disciplines like that? Like he found
Yeah.
psychology and game design. Like who would have made that connection?
Right. 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 I love that. I think it's the need to create art. I mean, it's dancers, they must dance, painters must paint, actors must act, all of the disciplines you have found in the theater, that you must do it. I mean, we know this, right? As Earl used to say, when you don't get to do it, you get physically ill.
Yeah,
Isn't that
yeah,
interesting?
yeah. Yeah, I could see that, if I feel that way, the business that I'm in, theater architecture, it ebbs and flows, right? Just like
Right.
acting does, it ebbs and flows. Not everybody, um, we try to be, cognizant of that and try to bring in work and keep steady work, but there have been definitely times in the last, 2 decades of the firm I've been with now
Yeah.
that there have been times where it's been very slow of
Yeah.
designing theater. And now we're fortunate in that we have many other sectors that we work in and that I've been able to cross over and things like that. But if I'm working on a workplace, yeah, I have to find the interesting part about it, and bring a little creativity to it. But my mind is on when's the next theater I'm going to design. or
Right.
when's the next show I'm going to design, right?
Right.
Um, which gets me beyond excited. I'm designing sound for an exhibit for Cleveland Museum of Art right now,
Mhm.
and just loving it, like digging in and trying to find stuff, and sort of all those creative juices that just get to exercise those muscles that you don't think about. You know,
Oh, I
uh,
love that. Yeah,
you know.
and how great for the soul.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you and I have talked a lot about authenticity
Mm,
in the past, right? And bringing your authentic self to things,
that's
not just
right.
to a character or to a design, but to your life in general, right?
Right.
How do you see that impacting the why in the art?
Ah, yes. Authenticity. Yes. It's interesting to quote another Meryl Streep thing. I think Meryl said something like, when I stopped caring about how I looked was when I became a brilliant actress, something like that. I don't want to
Yeah,
misquote Meryl, right? But I think that's really it for me. I think uh, I had a ton of insecurities, and continue to.
yeah. We
Um,
all have them, right?
right. And I'm one of those actors that has a hard time looking at themselves, watching themselves. But I knew that my authentic performance would have to come from a place that has nothing to do with how I look or what if someone thinks that I'm quote attractive or not or any of that stuff, that it has to be a million miles away from there. In order to play another person, you have to get under their skin. It has nothing to do with, if you have the right face or if you have, do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm.
It's I find it interesting. We all come in different shapes and sizes and colors and everything else, right?
Right.
And we all have uh, differences of opinions of what is beautiful and what is perfect and what is, appropriate.
Yeah.
And I think sort of keeping in mind that, like in an acting role, right? The director or casting agent might be looking for a group that look like they've been together.
Right.
And you can be the most stunningly beautiful person in the world, like traditional,
Yeah.
stereotypical beautiful person in the world, and you just don't get the role
That's right.
because you didn't fit in with the world.
That's
And I
right.
think so many people get hung up on that, right? Of, oh my God, I'm not pretty enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not,
That's right.
loud enough. I'm not, funny enough or any of that other
That's
stuff.
right.
Instead of saying, well, maybe this just wasn't, maybe that director is doing me a favor
Right.
because I maybe didn't fit within that world.
That's right.
And I would have to try to make myself fit into that world. And maybe that would go against my why, right?
Right.
And not be as believable. I wouldn't do as good a job.
Right.
And I would be worse off for it, right? And so
That's
sometimes I think those are gifts rather than, the worst thing in the world. It's like, if somebody loses a job, right? And in this particular day and age, there isn't a day I don't look on LinkedIn where I'm not seeing somebody else that says, looking for work because they've been laid off.
yeah.
And they've been so upset about it. And I've known a number of people in my life that have been laid off that feel like their entire soul's been crushed because they put so much of themselves into that company and everything else instead of really thinking about who they are and what
That's
their
right.
values are and what their why is. And then, um, and that employer probably did you a favor. And because you probably weren't the right fit for that culture or anything else. Not that you're a bad person,
Right.
but do you want to be someplace you'd not wanted or that
Totally.
you don't fit because you spend all your time and energy trying to fit, trying to be that round peg in a square hole.
That's right.
And then I think you lose so much of yourself and that why, and you're so busy trying to turn yourself into something you're not or that
Yeah.
you don't want to be that you can get lost, and it's hurtful, as we know, right?
Yeah.
It's very hurtful to not, to be, it's that feeling of rejection, right?
Right.
Why am I not good enough?
Right.
I'm trying so hard, and why am I not good enough?
That's right.
But I think staying rooted in that why you do what you do leads you out of that sort of darkness and that rejection,
Right.
and can get you to a better place and the next better thing for you.
That's
Right?
right.
So, have you ever felt like that before?
Oh,
Had that
yeah.
kind of
And then
experience?
you know that you've got to fill your gas tank up, your spiritual and emotional and artistic gas tank up again, right?
Yeah.
And I think the why, reminding yourself of the why is exactly what does that. And we all need to recharge it, I think, on a daily basis, don't you think?
Oh, completely. Right. And I think if you can't reconnect,
Yeah.
that's where I think, that's where therapists make all their money. Right.
Right.
Um,
Right.
you know,
It's great.
and
It's true
in
though.
some
It's
ways, that's
true.
what they're there for, right? They're there
That's
to help
right.
people reconnect with who they really are.
That's
And
exactly
sometimes
right.
it's painful to look in a mirror because sometimes you're afraid that you might not like the person that you've become or that you see,
That's right.
because maybe you've lost who you are.
Right.
And I had a good friend of mine who recently went through a very, very rough breakup, right? Marriage ended, and what did I do wrong? Why would my spouse leave me? And it's like, did you really do something wrong here? Did you really, or was it maybe just a failing, or did they do you a favor?
Right.
um and is this an opportunity for you to spread your wings and grow, right?
Right.
I look at arts organizations that kind of get stuck in this mud too, right?
Yeah.
um they think they're doing well. They think they're connecting with their audiences. They're putting on all kinds of shows, but the box office sales keep sliding,
Right.
and less and less donors are showing up, and they're getting less and less press, and they double down on what they're doing because
Yeah.
they want it to work so badly. I must be doing something right because they don't want to admit the failure.
That's right.
But it's okay to admit failure. The failure is not recognizing that what you're doing doesn't work.
Mm.
And the failure is, um, what do they say? You keep repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting different results,
Exactly.
right?
That's right.
And it's like an actor or like a designer who keeps on, doing the same audition piece
Right.
over and over, keep on showing the same tired old show from 20 years ago that nobody cares about anymore.
Right.
And how do you just create something new and reinvent yourself? Maybe you need to, recognize that you're, 40, 50 years old, and you're not the 20-year-old ingenue that you used to be,
Right.
right? Um, or that all of your designs, could really benefit from looking at investigating new technology and incorporating new technology to help tell the story, like projection or projection mapping or things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting out of your bubble, and maybe a different style of design, right?
Right.
Instead of doing all kinds of realistic sets, maybe go learn something about Brecht. I have a really good
Yeah.
friend of mine. She's an amazing artist, painter, right?
Mm.
And she used to work with me, and she moved on. She's with another firm, but she always is going to art classes and learning to recreate other artwork.
Okay.
And then she's got her own style, right? But she says, I get to learn from all these new things, and it keeps me fresh and keeps me engaged, and I find new things out about myself through that experience of what I like and what I don't like. What I might learn a new technique that I didn't know before, and
Right.
and I think that's why, like in your side of the coin, right? So many people are doing acting lessons all the time,
Right.
right? They're working with people like you, and to learn more about their craft, right? Um, so, what advice would you offer to these aspiring artists then, who are
Mm.
trying to identify their why and harness that and fuel their own creativity and their own journey in that,
Yeah.
you know?
I think I love researching great performances. I think if you go ahead and you look at, I always tell my students, go and try and look at Oscar and Emmy Award winning performances and try and figure out why. Speaking of why that artist got that award. Same with the Tonys. Try and figure out why this is considered the best of the best. Because I do think your talent is your taste as well. And I think, it's like applying for a job. If you're applying for all these jobs, right? You've got to know what it is you're applying for, right? I mean, you've got to know, you've got to see that light at the end of the tunnel with what it is that you're reaching for, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, though, about knowing your own tastes, right?
Mm,
And going and watching these other things and trying to find what do you like being honest with yourself. What
right.
do you really like? What do you
That's
not
right.
like about like about a job? Like, what do you like about your job? What do you
Right.
like about the company?
That's
What do you
right.
like about the clients? What do you not like about that?
That's
Right?
right.
What do you like about the characters you're auditioning for?
Right.
Or the motivation to become that character. What are you doing? What's your process to get into that character? And is it something that you like to do? Do you find success in it? Do you not find success in it?
That's
Or are
right.
you just doing it because somebody told you that's what you need to do? You
Yeah.
know? I think
That's
talk a
exactly
little bit
right.
about that because you've kind of been through that a lot, of finding, having these people come to you where somebody told them you have to do this, and and it's a horrible decision for that person.
It is. Um, and then I think they've got to look into their soul and weigh pros and cons, for being an artist and sticking in the game.
Yeah,
It's such an interesting crossroads to be at it in your life, right?
absolutely, absolutely. You know, um, I'm gonna leave you with sort of one more question here as we
Please.
start to wrap things up because we're approaching time here.
Crazy.
Uh,
These sessions go so fast. We have such
oh, they do, don't they? Like,
time.
yeah, as we always say, you and I, we could talk for hours.
We could.
Um, we look at we've talked about, Simon Sinek and the why and the how and the what, right? Before, and that's really sort of the motivation behind this particular conversation was finding your why, and then from the why comes the how and the what, right?
Hmm.
How have you found knowing your why, success or failures in the what and the how?
Mm, I love that. So, success or failures in the what and the how. Explain the difference to me.
Well, so, if you know your why, oftentimes they say, if you know the why, you can get to the how you're going to do something and the what
Yeah,
you're going to do,
right.
right? Um, so talk to me a bit about from your experience of finding your why and reinforcing your why. Because to me, it's a living document, right?
Hmm.
You don't magically wake up at 6 years old and say, I want to be one of those people. And that why never changes. It's
Right.
going to grow and evolve as you grow as an artist and, and life experiences happen and everything else. And you have to pivot sometimes.
Yeah.
Have you had any uh, experience where you've had a whole bunch of success, knowing your why, you're solid, and here's what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to do it, and then it doesn't work, and
Right.
not just once, but it's just consistently not working, right? Or on the flip side, you do discover something, you do discover that growth in yourself, and you do come up with an evolution of your why that changes how you think about the what and the how.
Right. I think it was probably for me right after I had a child. We were going to make a decision as to whether or not, because I had taken quite a bit of time off when I had my baby. I wanted to just be there for my child 24/7. And then it was time to decide about 3 years in, do I want to go back and I remember my husband said he wanted to see the light in my eyes again, and he knew that that light came from being in the game again. And I think that kind of says it all, don't you?
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. I remember, when we were having our son, it's a big life event, right? Having children.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that can derail a lot of people.
that's right.
Um, people give up careers to raise their children and things like that. Or whatever, have to take a different job because they need to have a steady income, and and that was kind of the position I was in. Here
Yeah,
I was working in theater, um, gig to gig, oftentimes, but also I had a steady job working at a theater in Southern California, but it didn't make a lot of money. And here we had a child
yeah,
that had a disability,
yep,
and my wife at the time said, I need you to find something that's going to pay better and be more stable
right,
because I need the help.
right.
And so you have to make a decision at that split in time of what are you going to do.
That's right.
And so I left the world of theater for a very short period of time, and you know did whatever I could. Left the world of theater, looked around. Eventually landed at an architecture firm in Southern California that was doing mostly retail, right? Malls, things like that, right? Doctors'
Right.
offices. But I found a way to weave in theater into malls.
Yes.
And I had clients that were big national accounts. Most of them don't exist anymore. But they were big national accounts, and we would design these malls. And malls are gathering places. They're just like theater. So what if we started putting entertainment spots, down the main concourse of a mall that where people could watch a show?
Right.
And so I talked to the folks there, and they kind of thought that was interesting. So we talked with one of the developers, and they thought that was interesting. And so we started kind of expanding a little bit, being a little bit more creative in this and that. Then we wound up moving back to Cleveland, and just that pure experience of working in architecture
Mm,
led me to work for an architect in Cleveland that just happened to be one of the premier theater architects in the U.S.
right.
Happened to be in Cleveland, Ohio. That just so I wasn't working on stage anymore, working at a theater itself anymore, but now I'm working for an architecture firm and designing the buildings. And that led me to meet some people and still, reconnect with people in Cleveland because I grew up here, and design some shows and things like that, which was great. So I got to dabble, and then I started teaching and teaching theater. So I get to dabble in the live creative side through that and everything else while I've built, you know, a nice career out of designing performing arts centers around the world.
Right.
And so I kind of wound up getting the best of both worlds because even though those circumstances changed, right,
Right.
on the what and the how, I didn't give up on the why.
Right.
I had to pivot the what and the how to get to another place that wound up, whether I knew it or not, being a stepping stone to my next adventure,
Right.
and growing it from there. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, and I think, you had similar with your child, having a child, that can
Yeah.
definitely throw some monkey wrenches into stuff. And
Oh,
I'm not saying people
sure.
shouldn't have children, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it could be a job loss. It could be the death of a parent. It could be anything, right? Your own health failing. I've had that instance myself with my eyesight, and having all kinds of issues with my eyesight. And as a lighting designer, and somebody who does projection, how your eyesight is valuable. Works
Right.
in CAD all day. You need your eyesight.
Right.
Um, so I would have to sit there and say, if I lost my sight permanently, what would I do?
Right. That's
And
exactly right.
how would I stay connected to the arts? What would
Right.
I do for a living? How would I still create? And so I would find myself, I lost my sight one time totally in both eyes. I had a corneal transplant and then a retinal detachment in the other
Wow.
eye. And so there I'm sitting there thinking, what if I don't get my sight back? And so I found myself out in my garage, running my chop saw, cutting lumber,
Mm,
and with no sight, and my son coming out and yelling at me, going, "What are you
yeah.
doing?" Well, I'm
Yeah.
fixing the bench on the front porch because
Yep.
for me, again, to be resilient, I build things, I make things, I
Yeah.
create. That's how I think through my problems and the challenges ahead of me. It could be a project, a problem on a project. What am I going to do about X, Y, and Z for this client? I'll go out into the garage, I'll make something or I'll cook something, and all of a sudden it's like some people have this epiphany in the shower, right? Or they
Right.
go for a walk or whatever. Um, and here I am, I'm out using power tools,
Yeah.
and I think, oh, I'm still creating and I can't see.
Right. Right.
So
I
I guess I'll
love
be
this
okay,
story. That's
you
right.
know? Um, but it's an interesting path we take, right? The why. And as
Yeah.
always, my lovely friend, I love hearing about your why. And I love hearing your insights into this and how people can find that and leverage it and use it to build their own path and their own career, right?
Yeah.
In this crazy thing called the arts.
No, I love it. I feel so privileged to know you all these years.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for having me come on. You must have
absolutely.
me again.
Absolutely. We will reconnect, I'm sure. And for the listeners out there, thank you again for tuning in and listening to Theater Operations Unleashed. And until next time, we will see you later.
Bye.
Thanks for taking the time today to listening to Theater Operations Unleashed. We hope to see you next month.